I remember the hospital lights most of all, those sterile, buzzing fluorescents that made everything look washed out and sickly. It was late evening when they finally wheeled me into the operating room for what was supposed to be a routine blood transfusion. I'd lost too much blood during a freak accident in gym class, of all places. One moment, we were playing basketball, and the next, I'd tripped and landed on an exposed metal pipe by the gym doors. The shock of pain was intense, but everything after that turned fuzzy. I recall drifting in and out of consciousness, dimly aware of the tightness around my arm as the nurses secured the IV. The beeping of monitors matched the frantic pounding of my heart. And then I was under. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was a dryness so terrible it made my lips crack. My throat burned as though I'd swallowed sand. The nurse, a plump woman with kind eyes, offered me water, and I gulped it down in a frenzy. But it did nothing to soothe my thirst. I kept waving for more, and she obliged, worried about my condition. Cup after cup disappeared, and still my throat felt like sandpaper. It was an ache deep inside, as though my veins were crying out for something I didn't understand. Even as my family filed in, relieved to see my eyes open and my heart beating, I couldn't focus on their tears of joy. All I could think about was the dryness, like a void inside me that no amount of water could fill. They discharged me 2 days later. My parents fussed over me every waking moment, making sure I was comfortable at home, pushing me to rest. My mother insisted on cooking all my favorite foods, steaming bowls of chicken soup, big plates of spaghetti with tangy tomato sauce, and chocolate pudding cups topped with whipped cream. It all tasted like chalk. I forced it down, not wanting to upset her, but every bite seemed to highlight my real craving, something metallic and raw. Even the smell of rare steak sizzling on the stove made me lightheaded with desire. In my mind's eye, I saw the pink juices drip off the meat and imagined them cascading down my throat, quenching that dryness for good. When I asked my dad if I could have my steak undercooked, he narrowed his eyes but obliged, thinking it was just a passing fancy. I tried everything to make the thirst go away. Sports drinks, fruit smoothies, endless gallons of water. Nothing helped. Instead, the craving grew worse, magnified by the fact that I was expected to return to normal life. Back at school, I felt like a stranger among my friends. My body was cold, yet a feverish intensity seemed to glow under my skin. Every time someone walked by, I swore I could hear their heartbeat, a steady thumping that echoed in my ears. It drew me in, making my pulse race. I tried to shut it out, but my senses had sharpened in a terrifying way. I could smell the faint tang of iron whenever someone had a paper cut, hear the subtle catch in a voice if they spoke while biting their lip. The world was louder, brighter, but all of it led back to one singular sensation: the thirst. I started to avoid people, spending lunchtime in the library or sneaking into empty classrooms to escape the torment. My best friend Eric noticed the change. He asked if I was okay, if I needed to see a counselor for lingering trauma from the accident. I shrugged him off, guilt clinging to my insides, because I was lying through my teeth. How could I explain it to him? That every time he got a nosebleed or someone around me had even the smallest cut, I had to fight the urge to lap it up like some starving animal. He would have looked at me like I was a monster. I told myself these impulses would pass, that maybe it was just a side effect of the transfusion or the medication, but as the days progressed, they only intensified. Late at night, unable to sleep, I would wake up drenched in sweat, dreaming of dark corridors filled with the echo of dripping liquid. My mouth would be so parched that it actually hurt to swallow. At first, I tried to calm myself by reading online articles about post-surgery cravings, but nothing matched what I was experiencing. Then, one night, I found myself heading to the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge until I found a raw steak. My hands trembled as I held it up to my nose. The smell made my head spin with desire. I pressed it to my mouth, hardly aware of what I was doing. When the tangy flavor of blood hit my tongue, a surge of warmth flooded my body. It felt like I was finally tasting the one thing I needed to survive. The realization horrified me. I dropped the steak immediately and backed away, shaking. As if sensing something amiss, my mother suggested I visit the hospital for a follow-up. There, under those same fluorescent lights, the doctors ran more tests, but they found nothing unusual. My blood work was normal, almost too perfect, they said. Whatever I was going through wasn't something they could diagnose with standard procedures. They recommended I talk to a therapist about post-traumatic stress. But I knew, deep in my gut, that therapy wasn't going to fix this. Something had changed in me on a fundamental level. It was as if the transfusion had flipped a switch inside my DNA, awakening an ancient hunger. I tried to push the thought aside as mere paranoia, but that voice in my head kept telling me I was no longer purely human. It became impossible to ignore my cravings. I started leaving the house late at night, wandering aimlessly through our suburban streets. Moonlight seemed to energize me, filling me with a restless excitement that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I'd look into the windows of quiet homes and sense the warm red blood pumping through the sleeping families inside. The thirst was so intense that it made my vision blur around the edges. I felt like I was on the brink of some final breakdown, teetering between who I used to be, a normal teenage kid who got into dumb accidents in gym class, and the thing I was becoming. One evening, after dinner, my father cut his finger while chopping vegetables. A single droplet of blood welled up, bright and mesmerizing. I caught its metallic scent in a wave of pure intoxication. My throat constricted as I watched him press a paper towel against the wound. He didn't notice that my hands were trembling. He didn't see the way my eyes fixated on that spot of red seeping through the white paper. It took every shred of willpower to not grab his hand and lick it clean. I rushed upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and sank onto my bed. My body was shaking, sweat beading on my forehead. It wasn't right. I was terrified of what might happen if I lost control. Day by day, my reflection grew paler, my eyes darker. Mum asked if I'd come down with the flu, but I insisted I was fine, just tired from the accident. She seemed uneasy. Perhaps a mother's intuition sensed that something was off. Eric continued to check on me at school, but I was distant, unreachable. In the hallways, I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The overhead lights were painfully bright, and the chatter of students made my ears ring. Worst of all was the constant, throbbing lure of blood. Every paper cut, every minor injury in the classroom seemed like a beacon calling out to me. At night, my dreams grew more vivid. I saw myself standing in a dark alley, cornering a stranger. There was a flash of red, and then I'd wake up gasping, tasting blood on my tongue. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, a night when I'd usually be hanging out with Eric, maybe playing video games or sneaking into a late-night movie. But I was in no state for socializing. Instead, I found myself drawn to the nearby park, moving in a trance under the cold glow of street lamps. The emptiness of the playground haunted me. The swings creaked in the breeze, and the distant hum of traffic felt unreal. I settled on a bench, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to quell the growing hunger inside me. That's when she appeared, some girl I faintly recognized from school. Lila, I think her name was. She was listening to music through her headphones, oblivious to the danger stalking the night. I didn't plan what happened next. It was as if something inside me snapped, unleashing a dark, primal side. My heart pounded like thunder, and my mouth tingled with anticipation. I stood, taking a few hesitant steps toward her. She noticed me and paused, pulling out one earbud and offering a cautious smile. Maybe she thought I needed help or was just lonely, but I couldn't form words. My eyes were locked on the rhythmic pulse in her neck. I lunged. It was a blur of motion, a tangle of arms, a muffled scream. I sank my teeth into her flesh, hot liquid pouring over my lips. It was both horrifying and euphoric. The taste of blood flooded my senses, more exquisite than anything I had ever known. Every nerve in my body sang with a twisted joy, a completeness that defied all logic. Lila's cries grew weaker as I fed. In the recesses of my mind, I knew this was monstrous, but the hunger blotted out everything else. Morality, fear, guilt. It was only the bright, burning ecstasy of blood. When I finally pulled away, Lila slumped to the ground, unconscious or worse. I staggered back, wiping at my mouth, my chest heaving. The world around me seemed sharper, more vivid, and yet the terror of what I'd just done was inescapable. My reflection in a nearby puddle caught my eye. My face was splattered with crimson, my pupils dilated into predatory slits. My teeth, my canine teeth, looked alarmingly pointed, like they had extended into fangs. I couldn't deny it anymore. Whatever I was now, I wasn't a normal human being. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. I knelt down to check if Lila was still breathing, a wave of guilt coursing through me, but a stronger voice in my head hissed that this was my destiny. As my fingers brushed her neck, the faintest flutter of her heartbeat thrummed against my touch. Relief and a new surge of hunger warred within me. I knew I should call an ambulance, but all I wanted was more of that warm fluid. My stomach twisted at the thought, and I stumbled away, mind reeling. A part of me whispered that I had to leave her, to flee before someone discovered the carnage. The taste of her blood still lingered on my tongue, and it was electric. My heart thundered, adrenaline coursing through veins that no longer felt fully mine. I could sense every pore of my skin, every shift in the air. In that moment, I realized that my transformation was complete. I had become one of the nightmares that lurk in the dark corners of storybooks. A vampire, a creature of thirst and shadow, bound to roam under the moonlit sky in search of life's vital fluid. The very idea was as intoxicating as it was horrifying. Slowly I stood up, feeling renewed strength surging in my limbs. With one last glance at the faint silhouette of Lila on the ground, I turned and sprinted into the night, my senses on high alert, every breeze a potential path to follow. The thirst would always guide me now. There was no going back to that awkward, blood-starved kid who stared at his pale reflection in the mirror. That part of me was dead. All that remained was the echo of a heartbeat and a hunger that would never be sated, my new life, my new purpose. And with each step I took, deeper into the shadows, I embraced the truth. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a predator reborn in darkness.